What if Henry and Emily made the Vanny masks? How much would the Five Nights at Freddy's universe change? Well, in part 1 of this story, that is exactly what we're looking into. Two things to keep in mind are that this story takes place in the Silver Eyes trilogy universe, and in the main universe, we don't really know who made the Vanny masks or why. We suspect that it may have been William Afton, Fazbear Entertainment, or even the Mimic. In this version of the Silver Eyes trilogy, we will learn how Henry creating the Vanny masks would change Five Nights at Freddy's. The events of 1985. Our story begins in 1985 when Elizabeth Afton found out that her best friend Charlotte Emily was murdered at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and the culprit was none other than her own father, William. Learning that her father was a monster who murdered 5 other kids along with Charlotte was more than she could take. At the age of 6, Elizabeth ran away from her home to the only person she could think of, Henry. Together, both of them mourned the loss of Charlotte, and Henry allowed her to stay until everything calmed down. However, Mrs. Emily was outraged that Henry would allow the daughter of their child's murderer to stay with them. It caused a lot of fighting between them, as all Elizabeth and Charlotte's twin sister Samantha could do was helplessly watch. In this universe, instead of having a twin brother, Charlotte Emily has a twin sister. Although Elizabeth and Samantha did grow close as Elizabeth stayed with the Emilys, one day Henry and Mrs. Emily's arguing reached its peak when Mrs. Emily started packing up her bags. She grabbed Samantha and gave Henry an ultimatum. Either Elizabeth goes or she and Sammy go. Henry stood his ground and reassured that all of them could live happily together with Elizabeth as part of the family. This answer made up Mrs. Emily's mind as she headed out the door with Samantha and their things, leaving Henry with the message, "The spawn of that murderer can never replace the real daughter we lost." After losing his wife and other daughter, Henry sank into a depression and spent most of his time in his workshop. It wasn't a deep depression since he still had his adopted daughter Elizabeth, whom he started calling Lizzie, to support him. While he barely spent time with her compared to how much time he worked, both Henry and Lizzie's favorite memories were of the things they did together as father and daughter. Sure, they didn't have a perfect relationship, but both of them were enough to keep each other going. With Lizzie's bubbly personality, it wasn't hard for her to make friends. Actually, all of Charlotte's friends were also her friends before Charlotte was murdered. After the death of Charlotte, all of them stayed friends with Lizzie to help keep her going. A young boy named John acted a little awkwardly around Elizabeth, but he admitted it was because he had the biggest crush on Charlotte and was still getting used to the idea that she was gone. John eventually started getting used to having Lizzie around instead of Charlotte and even began to grow a small crush on her. The rest of Lizzie's friends were Jessica, your typical valley girl with brown hair who could have been mistaken for Charlotte's sister looks-wise. She often had her hair dyed blonde to cover this up. Carlton, a red-haired goof, used comedy to cover up the troubling things he experienced with his father being a police officer. Marla, a deeply caring girl with brunette hair and a contagious personality. Lizzie had other friends that came and went, but John, Jessica, Carlton, and Marla stayed with her through thick and thin. After the death of Charlotte and the shutdown of Freddy's, Henry mostly stopped working on animatronics. His focus shifted to masks and costumes, and the animatronics he did make looked more like hybrids between robots and puppets. One of his most successful creations was a theater animatronic, which was wiry thin and had a depiction of a sun for the face. What was unique about this animatronic was that when the lights went out, it would glow blue and the sun face would resemble the moon more. We obviously know who this is, and yeah, it is way too early in the timeline for him to be built, but I thought it would fit the new line of animatronics Henry was building. The other animatronic Henry had built at this time was unique and kinda odd looking. When Henry revealed it to Lizzie, he said it was based on all the things Charlotte liked. It had the mask of a mime with a black and white striped body who dwelled inside a giant mechanical gift box. Henry and Lizzie had no idea what to call this and eventually just got used to calling it the puppet. Lizzie thought the puppet was malfunctioning because she would often find it standing upright in its box, or after she would turn away and then turn back, it looked like its head was turned towards her without it being powered on. When Freddy's got shut down, another company it had nearly wiped off the face of the map named Murray Co. rose to prominence. Henry had actually had some history with this company before starting Freddy's with William Afton, and the current owners were willing to hire him on again as a contractor. They loved the Sun and Moon Theater animatronic, and stage theaters all over the world were ordering it from Murray's Costume Manor, giving Henry a nice juicy bonus. They were heavily interested in his new gift box puppet prototype, but Henry told Murray Co. that it had a few kinks his daughter pointed out to be worked on first. John knew about the dealings between Henry and Murray's Costume Manor because he was a Murray himself. While his parents didn't own the company or Costume Manor, they were closely related to the owners and might have even worked there. Since John didn't have a last name in the actual books, I couldn't find anything on what his actual name was, and he kinda looked like he could have been related to the secret of the Mimic Edward Murray. I thought I could get away with pulling this stunt. Incredibly ironic that a kid of the Murray family would start having a crush on someone from the Afton family being raised by a father of the Emily family. She just happens to be none other than the daughter of William Afton himself to boot. Speaking of William Afton, nobody's really sure what happened to him. He was taken away by the police and ended up in prison, but that's the last anyone has heard of him. There were rumors that he had broke out and escaped, but surely the prison guards would keep too close an eye on someone that dangerous to not let him slip by, right? While growing up, Lizzie got to meet and become familiar with Henry's sister Jenny, who she started calling Aunt Jen. At first, Jenny was taken back that Henry would want to raise one of Afton's daughters and even sacrifice his own family for it. After Henry explained he didn't want to see little Lizzie end up in an orphanage and turn out like her father, Jenny started warming up to Elizabeth. Aunt Jen would sometimes even babysit her for Henry when he needed to go on trips or to events, and Lizzie's cheerful aura won her over. The Silver Eyes. 10 years later, in 1995, the town of Hurricane was preparing for a memorial to be held in memory of Charlotte and the 5 other children who were murdered in 1985. Elizabeth had turned 16 and was planning to attend the event with her father Henry, who was going to speak, and her boyfriend John, who was 15. Yeah, Lizzie and John got together after he awkwardly admitted to having a crush and fumbled asking her out. This didn't bother Lizzie because she was always hoping John would ask her out as soon as Henry allowed her to start dating. When Lizzie and John announced to their friends that they had started going out, Jessica joked that she was kind of jealous of Elizabeth. Jess teased that she had wanted to go out with John, but it's okay because there was always Carlton. Carl asked if Jessica actually meant that, and she replied that it was not likely. Ouch, Jessica, you really are the ultimate friend zoner. Taking a brief detour, I corrected something that the actual book got wrong. I know I'm not the first person to point this out, but The Silver Eyes takes place in 1995, yet Charlotte Emily and all her friends were around 17 to 18. This is despite the fact that Book Charlie was born in 1980. See the problem? In this version of the novel, everyone's age has been corrected and they're all still in high school. If you're wondering why Elizabeth is 16, it's because the lore has always implied that Elizabeth was older than Charlotte. I believe she's a few years older than Charlie, but I had her only be a year older in this story to keep things simple. The night before the memorial, Elizabeth woke up to hear murmuring from somewhere within the house. At first, she couldn't find where it was coming from until she started approaching the basement. As she got closer, she began to realize the murmuring was actually crying. Rushing through the door, she sped down the stairs to find Henry leaning against the gift box base of the puppet, and he was sobbing. The puppet itself was half taken apart but still activated and was just watching Henry. Lizzie noticed some of Henry's tears had dropped onto the gift box. Henry apologized to Lizzie for waking her up and said he was just talking to Charlotte, before he corrected himself, saying he was talking to the puppet about Charlotte. Henry admitted to Elizabeth that he didn't know if he could carry out his speech at the memorial. Lizzie told her daddy it would be okay if he cried while talking about Charlie at the event. Henry sat by the gift box with Elizabeth for a while, sharing the good memories he had of Charlotte before she was taken away. During this conversation, the puppet unexpectedly reached down and patted both of them on the head. This caused Henry and Elizabeth to both jump up before Henry reminded himself that he still needed to work on this thing. What was strange was that he didn't remember programming the puppet to be able to do that. The next day at the memorial, things took a turn while Henry gave his speech. As he started talking about how Charlotte was taken away from him, Henry got very angry about William Afton and went completely off script. He ranted about how William Afton was his closest friend, but that trust and companionship were lost in one night. Henry told the audience in a frenzy how he wished he never met the bastard in the first place, and that if he ever ran into William again, he would make sure that he stopped himself after looking over at Lizzie and all of her friends' stunned faces. With tears in his eyes, he apologized to the audience as he ran off. Henry didn't return to his seat and was missing for the remainder of the event. Elizabeth later found him backstage after the memorial was over. Henry tried apologizing to Lizzie for what he said about her father, but with her adorable British accent, Lizzie told Henry she had no idea what he was talking about because William Afton wasn't her daddy, and that the man in front of her always was. This made Henry smile again as he told Elizabeth how proud he was of the young lady she had become, but she should join her friends again and not worry about him. After meeting up with John, Jessica, Carlton, and Marla, the group discussed how Henry had gone off the rails and about the old Freddy's location. John told everyone that the town tried to build a mall over Freddy's and that it was only half finished before they abandoned the project. He, for some reason, wanted to explore the abandoned mall to see if the old pizzeria was still there, and for some other reason was really persistent about it. This caused Elizabeth to become irritated and leave the group briefly. John met up with her and apologized for wanting to track down her father's old place. Lizzie responded to John that she was the one who actually acted out of line and maybe they should find it to pay respect to Charlie. She and John started talking about the hazy but happy memories they had with Charlie at Freddy's before the rest of her friends joined in. Everyone at that moment agreed to break into the abandoned mall and find Freddy's. Later that night, Henry caught Lizzie searching for something in his workshop basement before she left. When he tried to ask her what she was looking for, Elizabeth tried to lie by telling Henry that she was searching for her car keys, which she must have left down there. Henry told Lizzie that if there's something she's not, it's a good liar, especially since she was holding her car keys in her hands. Elizabeth finally confessed to Henry that she was searching for the keys to Freddy's. Henry got upset at this revelation and demanded to know why Elizabeth wanted the keys to that forsaken place. Lizzie explained that she and her friends wanted to explore one last time and pay respect to Charlotte. Henry at first refused to let Lizzie set one foot anywhere near that place, and that caused an argument between the two. He told his daughter that that place was too dangerous to explore, and Lizzie demanded to know what Henry was hiding from her, since he didn't want her to go there. Henry convinced her he wasn't hiding anything and that he just didn't want her to explore somewhere she could get hurt. Both of them calmed down after Lizzie said that she and her friends would only be there for 15 minutes. While Henry headed over to where he stored the keys to Freddy's, Lizzie noticed a strange-looking rabbit mask on one of the tables. When Henry came back to where Elizabeth was standing with the keys, he noticed she was examining the rabbit mask she picked up. Lizzie asked him what the deal with the mask was, and Henry cautiously told her to be careful with it. Henry explained it was a specific technologically advanced mask that emitted a certain frequency. The frequency it emitted was designed to jam wireless animatronic signals and visual receptors. He explained further that while wearing the mask, the user becomes completely invisible to most animatronics. Given an example, Henry turned on the theater animatronic in sun mode and it started dancing and cartwheeling around both of them. After Henry turned on the mask and wore it, Sun started acting shocked and searching for Henry like as if he disappeared right in front of him. This was despite the fact that Henry didn't move an inch from where he put on the rabbit mask. After the short demonstration, Henry explained that the reason he made the mask was so it would be easier to work on animatronics while they were active. He got the idea after a mishap with the puppet while fixing it. It would constantly jitter and almost whack him a few times, but with the mask on, he could work with the animatronics while they were activated in peace. As Lizzie turned to leave with the keys to Freddy's, Henry stopped her and handed the mask over. He urged Elizabeth to take the mask with her, and when she asked why, he responded that she might need it should anything dangerous still be in there. Night 1. Elizabeth, John, Jessica, and Carlton all arrived at the abandoned mall, and as soon as they got out of their cars, they searched for a way in. Luckily, there was an unsecured window they could stack broken crates and scrap to reach the top. After breaking in, they searched the building while doing their best to keep as quiet as possible. It didn't take them long to find Freddy's, which everyone was surprised was still up. Elizabeth unlocked it with the key and they all stepped inside. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza had looked as though it had not been touched since 1985. Everything was still there: the games, prizes, tables, decorations, and the animatronics themselves. Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica were still center stage, looking ahead and grinning with whimsy. A separate stage called Pirate's Cove, which contained the animatronic Foxy the Pirate, still had its curtain up and a sign in front of it stating "Out of Order." Everyone gazed with complete awe at everything and everyone who was still here, frozen in time. Lizzie reminded everyone they only had 15 minutes to explore and suggested splitting up to cover more ground. Lizzie stayed in the main stage area, just staring up at the robots when a noise from the kitchen startled her. When Carlton walked out informing her that he knocked over some pots and pans, she caught her breath. Some squeaking caught her attention, and Elizabeth jumped when a fat rat scuttled across the checkered floor. Lizzie quickly darted her eyes back to the animatronics for some comfort and screamed at what she saw. Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica all had their heads turned in Elizabeth's direction. Even worse, Foxy the Pirate was peeking out of his curtain. All of Lizzie's other friends hurried back to the main area after hearing her scream. John grabbed and hugged Elizabeth, doing his best to calm her down. When they all asked what happened, Lizzie, with a shaking figure, pointed at all the animatronics with their heads still turned and peeking out from behind the curtain. Elizabeth cried out that none of them were like that when they arrived, and John investigated to calm his girlfriend down. At first, John slowly got on stage and made his way past Chica, past Bonnie, to Freddy. He put his hands up in front of him and said, "Hey, big guy. Whoa, you're a lot bigger up close," as he inched closer to the bear's face until their noses were almost touching. John poked the bear a couple of times on the shoulder before waving his arms above his head, yelling, "Bleh!" He turned around to the others and shrugged, suggesting that his yell wasn't as loud as whatever sounds Lizzie made to temporarily activate them. However, after John turned around again to face Freddy, this is when the bear did activate and waved his hands above his head, almost as if mocking John, as it screamed a high-pitched robotic scream. This caused everyone in the room to scream as John fell backwards off the stage. Luckily, the stage wasn't that high off the ground and everyone caught John before he could sustain any serious injuries. They all looked back up to see Freddy frozen like a statue in his arm flailing pose. This is when they heard a security guard calling out, asking what that noise was in the distance, and they all made a mad scramble to get out of there. After they all made their escape back into town, Lizzie, John, Jessica, and Carlton excitedly told Marla about their adventure. Marla became convinced to join, but only if her younger brother Jason could come along. However, as soon as Lizzie got home, Henry was waiting for her and he did not look happy. Elizabeth had stayed out nearly all night when she promised Henry she was only going to be at Freddy's for 15 minutes. Despite trying to convince Henry that she did try to stay out there for only 15 minutes, both of them got into a pretty heated argument. The fight caused Henry to ground Elizabeth to make sure she couldn't join her friends at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. As he grounded her, Henry demanded she hand the rabbit mask back. However, when Lizzie reached into her bag, she realized with horror that the mask wasn't with her. Henry immediately escorted Elizabeth back to the abandoned mall and unlocked the front doors. Lizzie questioned how Henry not only had the keys to Freddy's, but also the abandoned mall as well. Henry answered that he used to work for the mall before his business venture with Murray's took off, and they just let him keep the keys. Lizzie was suspicious of this, but pursued it no further. After entering the dilapidated building, Henry marched straight up to Freddy's and unlocked the front doors. Both of them started searching every corner and started to panic as they couldn't find the darn thing before running into a police officer. The police officer seemed to know Henry and asked why he was back in this old place. Henry told the officer he and his daughter were looking for something, and the officer asked if it had anything to do with what he found earlier. He led them to a squad car, and sitting in the passenger seat was the rabbit mask. Henry was relieved to have the mask back as he led Elizabeth home. Night 2. Back at home, Henry scolded Elizabeth about how they could have lost the mask forever and that she was grounded from going anywhere for a week. However, Lizzie had a plan because she wasn't going to miss out on exploring Freddy's with even more of her friends. She pretended to get along with Henry during the day enough to make him believe she wasn't going anywhere. She stayed up at night until Henry finally dragged himself out of his workshop, and they even watched some television together. Only after she made sure that Henry was asleep did Lizzie sneak out as quietly as she could without even considering the rabbit mask. Once she was far enough away from home, she ran as fast as she could to Freddy's. She didn't get in her car in case the sound of its engine would wake Henry up. By the time she got to Freddy's, her friends were getting impatient and almost gave up on the night. Tensions were already high when they broke in again. That's why they all freaked out when a security guard caught them. This security guard threatened to have them all arrested for trespassing, but he was shocked to hear Elizabeth tell him that her father owned Freddy's. He just stood there for a moment in total silence, just looking at Lizzie before surprisingly changing his tune. The security guard introduced himself as Dave and compassionately offered to give them a tour. When the teens asked why Dave was all of a sudden being nice to them, he replied that it was because he used to work for Elizabeth's father as an overnight security guard at Freddy's. Dave led everyone through Freddy's. The whole entire time he spoke with a very thick, almost fake sounding American accent. He also kept glancing back at Lizzie throughout the tour, which made her feel very uncomfortable. Dave showed everyone how the animatronics worked, and everything was going rather pleasantly until towards the end of the night, when Dave pulled Elizabeth aside to ask if she recognized him. When Lizzie told him no, Dave said he wasn't surprised since she wouldn't remember a simple overnight security guard at Freddy's. At the end of the night, Dave ushered everyone out of the abandoned mall. However, it didn't take long for the group to notice that Carlton was missing. Dave reassured everyone that Carlton must have gone home early, but he'd check the entire mall top to bottom and notify the police if he found him. This was odd for Dave to say since Carlton's father was none other than Police Chief Clay Burke. Everyone told Officer Burke about his son's disappearance, and he became very worried and sent a couple of officers to the abandoned mall. Lizzie rushed home and ranted to Henry about what happened, and at first Henry was upset that Elizabeth snuck into Freddy's again behind his back. After realizing one of her friends disappeared while staying over at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, he became more concerned about what might have happened to Carlton. Henry demanded to know the details of what happened at Freddy's that night and became very worryingly confused when Lizzie told him an old security guard of his gave them all a tour. He told Elizabeth that Freddy's never had an overnight security guard when it was running. Henry grabbed Elizabeth and the rabbit mask and headed straight over to Freddy's immediately with them. They were determined to find Carlton, as Henry had a gut feeling he didn't leave the pizzeria. As soon as they got to the abandoned mall, Henry and Elizabeth tried to go inside, but were stopped by one of the two officers Chief Burke sent. He told the two that everything was under control and that they shouldn't interfere with the police investigation. Henry and Elizabeth drove home, but Henry was hatching a plan. He told Lizzie that they were sneaking into Freddy's to find Carlton once night fell. Police investigation be damned. It was at this moment that the house phone rang, and when Elizabeth answered it, she found out Jessica was on the other line. Jessica asked if she was going to look for Carlton, and when Elizabeth said yes, Jessica told her she was coming with them one way or the other. Night 3. When Elizabeth, Henry, and Jessica all arrived at the abandoned mall, an odd sight beheld them. While yellow police tape was all over some places in the mall, it was torn in others and didn't cover all entry points. Even more worrying was that there were no squad cars or officers outside the building. Henry told everyone to stay close because things were getting real tonight. Everyone entered the abandoned mall as cautiously as possible, not knowing what to expect once they got inside. As soon as Henry, Elizabeth, and Jessica entered Freddy's, they started searching top and bottom for Carlton. It wasn't until 2 hours in, when they were about to give up the search, that Jessica heard Carlton's voice call out to anyone from behind a shelf. Jessica shoved the shelf aside with all of her strength, revealing a doorway into a secret room that had Carlton sitting on the floor, trapped inside an old animatronic costume. Jessica was of course ecstatic and relieved to see Carl again, but he informed her not to touch the costume. He explained that Dave, the security guard, trapped him in it, and that this thing was actually a spring lock animatronic. All it would take was one wrong move, and the animatronic parts would spring lock back into place, possibly killing him. She told him not to worry as she retrieved Henry to help Carlton with this situation. Once Henry got inside, he got to work on freeing Carlton. However, as soon as Henry accidentally bumped one of Carlton's arms and hip areas, the spring locks started locking back into place. The animatronic parts broke Carlton's left arm and dug into his left thigh as he let out a scream. Henry, thankfully, was able to reverse this and undo the clamping down in those areas before working on the rest of the costume. Jessica, in a brief moment of weakness, completely let down her guard and begged Carlton not to die because she wanted to be with them. Carlton, despite the pain, blushed the deepest shade of red ever at this, and the confession made Henry even more determined to free the boy from its prison. As Henry worked away at the spring lock suit, everyone's attention turned to the doorway as they heard footsteps slowly getting closer and closer to it. The footsteps only paused every now and then, and when they paused, it was always followed up with some kind of deep mechanical laughter. Henry informed everyone that the animatronic security mode must have been activated and shoved the rabbit mask into Elizabeth's arms. He directed her to buy him some time, but Elizabeth told her father that she was too scared to go out there. Henry reassured her that as long as she had the mask on, none of them could see her, before giving her an encouraging hug and telling her she could do this. Nervously gulping in air and shakily getting up, Elizabeth then swallowed her fear as she donned the mask. It hummed to life as she clicked it on and the red eyes lit up. She darted out of the room before nearly screaming and falling over herself. Right outside of Carlton's room was Freddy Fazbear, but it wasn't the Freddy she knew and her friends knew. This Freddy replaced his blue glossy eyes with silver glowing pinpricks in the middle of dark voids, staring her down. At first, Elizabeth thought the bear saw her as he continued staring in her direction. After a minute of him just standing there and laughing his deep mechanical laughter, a wave of shaky relief washed over her as she confirmed the mask was indeed working. Her relief was short-lived as Freddy started walking into Carlton's room. With only seconds left, she picked up an expired can of Fizzy Faz and hurled it at a framed poster of Freddy. It just bounced off the framed poster, leaving a crack in it. That wasn't enough to get Freddy's attention as he was still entering the room. He was nearly all the way in as she heard Jessica scream about how they were all gonna die. Desperately, she grabbed another can and just chucked it at the framed poster. Crash! Glass shattered everywhere as that can exploded against Freddy's poster face, creating a foamy, noisy mess. Glass fell to the floor in pieces as Freddy suddenly turned around at the very last second and walked towards the poster. Elizabeth knew her mission wasn't over yet as she ran ahead of Freddy toward the end of the hall. She picked up a chair and smashed it against another framed poster, shattering glass everywhere again. She had no idea if Freddy could hear her while wearing the mask, but she tried calling out to him anyway. Elizabeth discovered that when she yelled through the mask, it wasn't her voice but a computerized filtered one. "Hey Freddy," she called out to the bear. "Are you having fun yet?" Elizabeth found out that Freddy in fact could not hear her because he only walked towards where the second poster had been shattered. Elizabeth kept the routine of distracting Freddy until he was right beside the stage again. She nearly had a few scrapes with Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, who also investigated the noises she made, but was able to avoid them. Elizabeth rushed back to Carlton's room and discovered that Henry managed to get Carlton out of the springlock suit nearly unharmed. Henry informed everyone that it was too dangerous to leave just yet and that they would have to wait until 6 a.m. when the animatronic security mode switched off. Henry checked his watch and it was 5:37 a.m. Elizabeth knew what she had to do. She had to head back out there and keep the animatronics busy until 6. While Jessica clung to Carlton, Elizabeth stayed outside the door for the remainder of the night. Whenever an animatronic approached them, Elizabeth would lead them astray. At 6 a.m., Chica, the closest animatronic to Elizabeth, blinked a couple of times before her glossy purple eyes returned. She, along with Bonnie, Foxy, and Freddy, all slowly returned to the stage in Pirates Cove. As soon as they escaped the abandoned mall, Henry rushed Carlton to the hospital and called Clay Burke. Jessica stayed with Carlton at the hospital with Clay as Lizzie and Henry returned home. Lizzie and Henry thought that they would never have to go near Freddy's again until Lizzie got a call from Marla that her brother Jason was kidnapped. She told Elizabeth that a police officer rang her doorbell and asked to interrogate Jason about what he witnessed at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. When Marla asked if she could come along, the officer said it was not necessary and that he wouldn't be long with Jason. However, after hours of Jason not returning home, she called the police station to ask what was taking so long, and the police had no files on record of a child named Jason entering the building. Marla looked all over town for hours until nightfall, but couldn't find a trace of him. Elizabeth and Henry knew where he was and headed out to Freddy's once more. Night 4. Elizabeth and Henry wasted no time, and as soon as they got to Freddy's, they checked the room they found Carlton in first, but Jason wasn't in there. Instead, he was tied up on stage next to Bonnie, Chica, and Freddy. Elizabeth instinctively put the mask on as she rushed on stage to help Jason. The poor kid quivered in fear as he begged the rabbit lady not to hurt him while crying. Elizabeth told him it was her as she untied his ropes, but as soon as that happened, the animatronics activated. Elizabeth and Jason dashed back to Henry as the 4 robots started chasing after Jason. Right before reaching Henry, 2 entirely different animatronics got in their way. The first was a yellow version of Freddy, the other a yellow rabbit that looked nothing like Bonnie. Elizabeth told Jason to run to Henry as Henry was calling to him. The 2 yellow animatronics tried to grab Jason as he darted in between them, but just as they were about to grab him, Elizabeth smacked the yellow bear on the side with a chair and caused him to domino into his rabbit partner. Elizabeth ran past them back to Henry and Jason as the 2 quickly got up. Henry urged them into the main office as he closed both doors on both sides. He told them that these doors should keep them all safe right before the power went out and the doors went back up. The power to the building flashed on again, but Henry noticed on one of the office monitors that they were on reserve power. An indicator showed power at 100%, but it was already starting to go down. The indicator informed Henry that the building had enough power to last 6 hours, but he knew using the doors and cameras would shorten it the longer he used them. Elizabeth told Henry and Jason she would keep all the animatronics busy to help reserve power and keep them alive, so both of them got to work, Elizabeth leading as many animatronics away from the main office as she could at a time, and Henry closing the doors only when the ones who got through were right in front of the doorway. After Elizabeth would lead the ones at the doorway, Henry would reopen the door after Elizabeth led away whatever animatronic was lingering in front of it. At 5:58 a.m. the reserve power ran out, and Jason latched onto Henry, completely shivering and scared out of his wits. Elizabeth realized she was mostly blind in the dark with the rabbit mask on and was of no use to Henry and Jason. Everyone waited anxiously as they hoped they would last the remaining 2 minutes. Heavy footsteps were heard in front of the left doorway before a yellow mechanical hand grabbed the door frame, followed by the other. The yellow rabbit then peeked his head in from behind the door with those silver pinprick eyes in the middle of his eye sockets. He shuffled slowly into the room like a zombie while outstretching one of his hands as Henry shoved Jason behind him. "You'll have to go through me if you want the kid," Henry declared as the yellow rabbit's hand was only an inch from his face. Right then, he stood up, blinking twice loudly before his faded green eyes returned. returned. The yellow rabbit put his outstretched hand back by his side as he spun around and walked straight out of the office. Henry and Jason were both shaking with joy at being alive in that moment. They heard Elizabeth's British accent without the rabbit mask as she called to them from the dining area. "Hey Daddy, is it over? Are you and Jason okay?" Henry and Jason rushed out of the office to greet Lizzie as Henry hugged his daughter, just thankful she was okay. After dropping off Jason at Marla's, Henry and Lizzie headed over to the hospital to tell everyone the good news and let them know they were still alive. Elizabeth was just ecstatic to find out John was there too, as she practically leaped into John's arms before both shared what felt like to them the longest kiss in their lives. This was broken up by Jessica, who ironically told them to go outside while she was still clinging to Carlton's embrace. Everyone laughed and shared the good vibes they had in Carlton's hospital room. When they arrived home, Henry finished fixing up the puppet and Lizzie invited John over to hang out. During John's visit, the phone rang and Lizzie picked it up. The call she got shook her as a worried expression appeared on Elizabeth's face. John asked her what was wrong after the call ended and Elizabeth told John they needed Henry. In the basement, Elizabeth told Henry and John about the call she got. It was from a man with the same British accent as hers who told her he wouldn't stop going after Elizabeth and causing havoc in Hurricane. He said if she truly wanted things to end, to meet him at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza at midnight, or everyone she knew would start disappearing one by one. Henry decided Elizabeth should know who that was and told her the man on the phone was William Afton, her real father. He figured out for a while that William Afton was the one pulling the strings the whole time. Still, Elizabeth had one question. Why didn't William Afton just steal the rabbit mask for himself? Henry suggested that he had no idea what the mask was for since he tried it during the day and observed what it could do on nights 3 and 4 when she used it. If they were to confront William Afton, they should be prepared in case he counters the rabbit mask's effect. John announced he was coming with them, and Lizzie argued she wasn't going to put her boyfriend in danger. John argued that he could never forgive himself if he allowed anything to happen to Elizabeth, and she knew it was foolish to try to convince him to stay behind. All three of them agreed to confront William Afton together. Night 5. When Elizabeth, Henry, and John all arrived at Freddy's that night, the yellow rabbit animatronic was there waiting for them, along with Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and the yellow bear all behind him. Elizabeth couldn't figure out why, but something was different about the yellow rabbit, and she immediately put on her white rabbit mask. This is when the yellow rabbit took 2 steps forward before laughing.
Did you really think that mask would work on me? I can still see you.
The rabbit took off his head to reveal the same man underneath who claimed he was Dave the security guard. This man raised a finger that was shaking with rage at Elizabeth while having the angriest expression on his face. There was even some spittle in the corner of his mouth.
You should have known who I was the night I gave you and all your little friends a tour.
The man in the rabbit suit yelled.
Running away from home was one thing, but not recognizing your own father. How disrespectful.
William, it's been 10 years. Why would you think we haven't moved on? Henry asked. You stopped being my daddy, Elizabeth stated with an angry tone you could still hear through the digitized voice her rabbit mask gave her. The night you killed Charlotte and all those other children.
What do you mean?
William Afton laughed maniacally.
You mean my friends here, who are all happy to do as I say?
Elizabeth, John, and Henry all had horrified expressions on their faces as William Afton waved his arms around to the other animatronics. William told everyone the children had been possessing the robots the entire time and were under his control.
Don't bother trying the office. I jammed the door shut,
William Afton remarked.
They might not see you, Lizzie, but I'll make you watch as my friends tear apart the guy who tried to race you and your little boy toy.
The animatronics behind William Afton began to move forward, but before anyone could get far, they heard mechanical sounds like a chorus of ticking clocks in the room. It was accompanied by strange laughter. A glowing blue, thin robot wearing pajamas with a half moon on its face danced into the dining hall. John and William Afton freaked out, having never seen the theater animatronic like this before.
What the hell is that thing?
William Afton cried out in genuine terror. Bonnie, the closest animatronic to Elizabeth's group, tried to walk further up to them. The Moon Theater animatronic danced in between Bonnie and Elizabeth's group as it said to the grumpy purple bunny,
Good night.
Moon pushed Bonnie over with ease, and the bunny started really struggling to get back up. Foxy had a go at Moon as he ran towards it full speed. Right as he raised his hook hand to plunge into Moon while running, Moon yelled,
Take your nap.
and grabbed Foxy's upper torso. It threw Foxy over its shoulders, head first into the ground. This temporarily disabled Foxy as he landed on his back and slid a couple of feet across the ground. Henry was impressed that the theater animatronic he made was really this strong. John asked Henry how it knew how to fight, and Henry told him he installed a security mode that allowed it to protect people in danger. However, even he was surprised by how strong Moon was. Unfortunately, Moon's fight against the other animatronics came to an end when it tried to attack Freddy. William Afton grabbed one of Moon's arms, Freddy the other, and they pulled in opposite directions until Moon's arms ripped out of its sockets. William Afton grabbed Moon's head and ripped it off for good measure. He stood there for a few seconds as what was left of Moon fell over before clapping his hands twice.
Okay, children, playtime.
William Afton yelled as both Bonnie and Foxy had gotten back up again. He pointed an outstretched arm and finger at Elizabeth, Henry, and John and ordered,
"Make them suffer and leave nothing behind."
All of the animatronics, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and the yellow bear with their pinprick silver eyes marched towards Elizabeth, Henry, and John. "There's too many of them," Elizabeth told Henry and John. "I can't divert all of them away from us." "Lizzie, Elizabeth," John began, "if we don't make it through this, you should know I've always wanted us to get married and have kids together. You were already thinking of giving me grandchildren of Lizzie?" Henry asked, completely shocked. "Now's not the time, John," Elizabeth stated. "We can talk about that later. We need to figure out how to get out of this." "We might not be making it out of this," Henry glumly remarked. Elizabeth couldn't believe what her daddy was saying. He wasn't one to give up, and neither was she. Elizabeth desperately wanted to believe there was still some way to beat this situation. As all 5 animatronics kept getting closer and zeroing in on them, Elizabeth went from thinking there was a way around them to realizing it might actually be all over. She slowly took off the rabbit mask, looking over at John and Henry. She and John embraced each other as Henry held on to both of them, waiting for the worst to happen. A faint melody could be heard that seemingly appeared out of nowhere, like something from an old wind-up music box. It was the tune of My Grandfather's Clock, and everyone from the animatronics to Elizabeth's group to even William Afton all turned their heads in the direction the music was coming from. At first there was only the music, then the front entrance door slowly opened as a very slim figure wearing a white mask pushed its way through. It was the puppet, walking on 2 very wobbly legs and pieces of broken string dangling like tassels all over. Elizabeth and Henry noticed that there were purple stripes under each eye reaching to its mouth. William Afton took off his rabbit head and stared at this thing for a moment before he started bursting out laughing.
"What's this?"
William Afton asked.
"Your backup? It can barely walk. Oh, I'm so scared."
What happened next made William Afton's jaw almost unhinge in utter shock. The puppet started hovering above the ground before it floated over to Freddy Fazbear. It put its hands on Freddy's face as it just stared at him. Freddy tried turning his head away from the puppet, first looking over at Bonnie, then all the way to the other side at Chica. The puppet kept following his gaze though, and when he looked back at it, the puppet reached up and booped Freddy on the nose. Freddy's nose made an adorable honk sound as the puppet let out a cute giggle fit for a little girl. Freddy joined in, laughing his deep laugh too. Nobody, especially William Afton, could make heads or tails of what was going on with the animatronics.
"What is this?"
William Afton asked shakily as all the animatronics' eyes returned to their normal glossy colors without blinking. The puppet turned towards William Afton and floated towards him as the other animatronics turned around and started walking towards him too. William Afton demanded to know what they were doing and told them to attack Elizabeth, Henry, and John again. It wasn't until the puppet was right in front of William Afton's terrified face that it spoke with the voice of a little girl.
I recognize you, but I'm not afraid of you. Not anymore. The others are under my protection.
William Afton pathetically screamed out to all the animatronics to stay away from him and that they were still under his control. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and the Golden Freddy all had angry expressions as they got closer to him. William Afton put his rabbit head back on and prepared to fight the haunted robots once under his thumb. It was a one-sided curb stomp. All the bigger animatronics mercilessly beat him down. As they did, the spring locks inside the suit activated with each powerful whack. William Afton let out painful screams and spurts of blood shot out randomly as the puppet rushed up to Elizabeth's group. "Get out of here!" the puppet cried out in the same little girl voice. "Are you coming back with us?" Elizabeth asked, reaching her hand out to the puppet. It reached up its hand and touched its fingertips with hers. "I can't," the puppet responded. "The others will only listen to me if I stay with them." "Who are you?" Elizabeth asked, but before she could get her answer, Henry grabbed her, saying they needed to go. All three of them escaped Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, leaving the puppet behind and William Afton to die. After all the events that happened at Freddy's, Elizabeth revealed to her friends that she was moving away from the town of Hurricane. John was devastated and begged her not to go, or at the very least come back and visit every once in a while. Elizabeth informed John that she was moving in with her Aunt Jen out of town and that he should just let go of her. Witnessing her biological father come back, try to kill her and everyone she knew, and then die in the most brutal way possible was more than she could handle. She had to get away from it all and put Freddy Fazbear's Pizza behind her. Lizzie's friends weren't too happy about this, but Henry supported her and said that anytime she needed him to not be afraid to call. The day Elizabeth loaded her things into her car and drove off behind Aunt Jen's vehicle was difficult for everyone to take in as they watched her shrink into the distance until they could see her no more. Epilogue 2 years later. 2 years later, in 1997, John was 17 and heard the news of there being a new girl in his high school. He barely paid any mind to it because despite how long she had been gone, John still missed Elizabeth Emily. He hadn't tried dating again since the day she left in the desperate hope that someday Lizzie would come back. Subconsciously, John knew she wasn't coming back ever, but the stubborn side of him still held out. This all changed when one day after school, he was heading to his car in the parking lot. As he walked through the lot, he spotted a girl with the hood of her car up and smoke billowing out of the engine. The girl was muttering to herself about how this couldn't be happening, and John tried to see if he could help out in some way. "Engine trouble?" John asked, and the girl still had her head under the hood as she answered yes. This girl asked if John knew anything about engines, and he told her that even if he did, it wouldn't help unless she had spare parts lying around. When John offered her a ride home, that's when she took her head out from under the hood to thank him. John was shocked at what he saw because this girl with brown hair was really pretty. That wasn't the only thing that got to him. She looked kind of familiar to him, but he couldn't understand why. When the girl saw his expression, she became confused. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," the girl remarked. Yeah," John replied. "You just remind me of someone." "Oh," the girl said sadly, looking down. "Girlfriend?" "I don't have a girlfriend," John answered before quickly adding, I mean, I did, but we broke up 2 years ago. You don't look anything like her." "Well, that's a relief. What was her name?" the girl asked. "Elizabeth," John told her, and that's when the brown-haired girl in the red dress started laughing heartily. This caused John to raise an eyebrow. "What's so funny?" John asked. "It's the strangest thing," this girl answered, "but I used to know a girl named Elizabeth Afton when I was little. She was my girlfriend before she moved away," John said before he asked, "Just who are you?" The girl with the brown hair and the red dress replied with, "My name's Samantha Emily, but you can call me Sammy if you like." John just looked at her, not knowing how to process what he'd just been told.